We'll crack right into the agenda. The next speaker will be Ben Cartwright Cox, who is a systems engineer. After building a WAF, helping operate a large CDN, and rejigging a bank's payment gateways, he is currently focused on making day-to-day BG operations less awful with BGP tools. So please join me in welcoming, there he is, Ben to the stage.
Hi, everybody. Hi, this is Signed Not Secure. I've already done my intro, or he's already done my intro for me. So we'll get straight back into it. In January, something really interesting happened. In some times of January the 3rd, Orange Spain briefly disappeared off the internet in a interesting and I think a unique first of its kind way. So the rough timeline goes is that sometime on January the 3rd, somebody logged into Orange Spain's RIPE NCC account, for which there was no two-factor password on it, and not really sure of what to do. They were posting online about how they had access to this account. Normally, this is just embarrassing, but poor password policy, etc., is not anything new to the world. But what is the interesting thing is this person clearly, I guess, not knowing what to do with a RIPE NCC account, decided that the best thing that they could do was go into the RPKI portal and then sign rowers for prefixes that didn't have rowers to some ASN, which meant that their prefixes became instantaneously invalid. This greatly impacted Orange's traffic. This is a screenshot from Cloudflare's radar system, and you can see, highlighted thankfully, where the outage starts. And then in the evening, when they finally manage to get control of their RIPE NCC account again, the sort of surge in the evening, which I assume is people being like, oh, hey, the internet's back. I can go and do whatever I do on the internet. Cat pictures, so is the thing today. We can use RPKI data to roughly piece together the exact timeline, rather than using the threat actors timeline on Twitter. So roughly, we can see the first changes happened around about 9 a.m., and we can see then the big changes happened sometime around like 3 or 4, 2 p.m., roughly speaking, and then the problem was fixed at 5 UTC, or maybe 6 p.m. So, whoops. RIPE NCC does not enforce two-factor for users, or at least they didn't at the time. They do now. RIPE NCC also didn't have any way to check if everybody in your organization had two-factor enabled. I still don't think they have this, but I guess the slow enforcement of this means that this is a moot point. It seems to have taken a long time for RIPE and/or Orange to react to the incident, which probably did not help. Their RIPE NCC account probably shouldn't have been compromised by malware, which is easier said than done if you have a large organization. If you're running a large nation telco, obviously that's extremely easier said than done. But they probably shouldn't have had their RIPE password be RIPE admin, which is a little bit embarrassing. But also, the other interesting thing, and the next bit of investigation, is that it exposed who wasn't filtering RPKI towards Orange. So, because Orange Spain and Orange Open Transit are separate entities, so we can see that, interestingly, Orange Open Transit does not filter of their customer, Orange Spain. We're going to be saying orange a lot in this talk, I apologize. So that's interesting in its start, because RPKI generally means that you filter all of your inbound routes. But the second thing is that we can see the people who we already sort of know don't filter routes. Interestingly, Deutsche Telekom is mentioned here. They are now filtering routes. They announced this. I haven't changed my slides, but they've also confirmed to me in person that they are now actually enforcing this. So there is one less tier 1 network that is not filtering routes, which is great. So now we only have, realistically speaking, Tata and Sparkle left. So, 2 possible takeaways. First of all, when this incident happened, how fast did RPKI kick in, given this is the first real incident of malicious intent dropping RPKI? And secondly, if this happens to you, how do you fix this in an emergency? So, first of all, how fast did networks drop and restore their routes? So after a huge amount of pain on my end of bringing back my own archives, this is roughly the visibility graph of the Orange, one of the /12s that Orange Spain announces. So we can see, even though the RPKI routes were signed sometime around 3:30-ish, or sorry, 1:30, it takes a while for this information to propagate out into the system, stuff to get built or whatever. And so the first serious drops begin at 11 past 2. And then, in stages, they drop down sometime around 5, 6 p.m. Things start going back up when the rowers are removed. So on the way down, we can see several phases where different networks are dropping it, which is interesting, in that it takes somewhere between 10 past 2 to a reasonable amount of time, I would think, for the internet to decide that this prefix is no longer good. And then on the upside, we see a very different propagation thing. We don't see the waves anymore. We see a large pickup, and then we don't see anything. The other interesting thing about this graph is that the question says, who is carrying these last 100 paths? Because the visibility of this thing, which is a rough traffic towards it's a rough indicator towards traffic. This never reaches 0. And so the answer upon investigation is the standard, what you'd expect. It's the non-ROV networks who have Orange transit themselves, or peering with Orange, or Orange Open Transit, who peer with Orange Spain directly, because it appears that Orange Spain do local peerings and CDN caches and things like that, or people who have Deutsche Telekom, Tata, or Hurricane Electric transit, as it turns out. And as always in BGP, there's a small amount of stuck routes, which is a fact of life at this moment. The other interesting thing is that even though things looked restored by the end of the day, this is roughly speaking a 24-hour graph, or at least it stops at midnight. The restoration didn't reach 100%, and that's because it seems a lot of vendors are very, very bad at fully restoring it. So if this thing happens to you, what you shouldn't do if you have an invalid route is that you should not just delete the invalid route. You should then sign the route to be valid, because the moment it is valid on any of the data sources, then the system unlocks. If you remove it, you have to wait for the bad data to purge out fully. Some other interesting things to note. Apparently, I have no data on this directly, but from hearsay of users on the ground and affected by this, Amazon could still reach Orange Spain, which is very interesting. This would imply that there is a lack of ROV on AWS's side. However, I tried to replicate this finding by taking a prefix of mine, making it ROA invalid, waiting for it to drop off, and Amazon did drop off. And so this is either false, or Amazon has some really interesting arrangements with certain networks. So it's interesting that Amazon appears to have some special logic here. So second point, if this happens to you in production, how do you fix it? So there is a system called SLURM, which stands for Simplified Local Internet. Hang on a second, that's not what SLURM stands for. The reason is that the acronym doesn't seem to make sense, but if you go back in time, the acronym does make sense through some interesting flexes, abuse on the language. I guess they just never wanted to change the name, because why would you get rid of a good name? But SLURM is a great tool. So SLURM is basically a small JSON file that lets you do two things. It lets you filter routes out, so that means that you can get rid of stuff that you don't want. Let's say there's an incident, you just want to ignore all of Orange's ROAs. You can do that. You can just edit the SLURM file and target that out completely. The other thing you can do is you can inject data into your system only. So, for example, one of the issues that people had while deploying RPKI onto their networks is that some people require, let's say on IPv4, /32 black hole routes. And obviously, what's unhelpful is if your RPKI system steps in and says, well, that's clearly invalid because the maximum prefix length is a /24. The way to solve this is that you can put into your SLURM file a thing that only exists in your network to say /32 announcements are actually okay. And then you can use that to make it intrinsically ROA valid without telling the rest of the world that you want /32 routes to be valid. A SLURM file looks something like this, for example. So the top one is a filter out, prefix and an ASN combo. And then at the bottom, we have an ROA being injected in, which allows it to be from a 25 to a 26. So this is also how you would formulate a /31. You could, of course, also write some terrible configs here. You could easily effectively whitelist the entire of the internet. So be careful. But my point is that you should have one of these files ready to go. Because restarting even if there's nothing in the file, you should probably have one configured. Because this allows you and your operators to quickly react to incidents, rather than trying to figure out what the Slurm support in your program is and restarting processes and potentially doing deployments if you run Kubernetes, figuring out Kubernetes. And so you don't want to be doing that in an incident. Or alternatively, you may not be able to do that in an incident because of the incident. Slurm has pretty good support on all the RPKI clients that you should be using. So for example, Routinator, I mean, you can just go and look at the docs. StayRTR, which is commonly used in combination with the OpenBSD RPKI client, has a command line flag. You just give it a Slurm file and it works. If you use GoRTR, you should be using StayRTR. If you use Fort, first of all, if you're using Fort, make sure you're on a recent version. There are several pretty serious problems. But then onwards from that, if you're using Fort, check the documentation. There is Slurm support. I cannot in good faith, if you're using other ones, I cannot in good faith recommend the other ones right now. So, takeaways. Bad passwords are everywhere. This is a pretty obvious piece of advice. You should use two-factor on almost all systems that support it, and enforce it with policy if the system supports it. Second, if you don't validate ROV, your upstreams likely do now, which is a fantastic success, because it means that even if you are not protecting your downstreams, your upstreams will be doing this for you, which is a great success in internet security. Third, you can mitigate these incidences like this for yourself by using Slurm. So if a customer calls you and says, we've made a huge mistake, can you remove that rower? Well, first of all, they need to remove that rower, but you can increase the time that it takes, decrease the time it takes to restore by adding in a Slurm file, an exception. Other interesting finding is that HE, despite claiming they do ROV validation, does not appear to do ROV validation on a timescale that is quick. Either that or the current system is completely broken. I haven't been able to sort of experiment enough to confirm either. And also, the other thing that interested me, certainly, was that it takes longer for prefixes to come back from an RPKI incident than it does to lose them. So if you cause an RPKI incident, restoring from it takes longer than it starting. Finally, these instances and the research around these incidences are only really possible if you feed root collectors. So a root collector is effectively a system, a BGP peer, which you go and feed your full table to, and then it may or may not store this data, hopefully forever, but forever is a long time. But it will store that data and allow academics, researchers, people like me, to go and look at how internet routing is done across the world, across many different types of networks. BGP Tools, which is the company that I am, has a bunch of stuff, including collectors on NetNod. So if you are already feeding BGP Tools over NetNod, first of all, thank you. But if you're not, please consider doing so. You can go to, no, not that one. You can go to the link as provided or just scroll to the bottom of the site. But you also shouldn't just feed me. There are other projects. Famously, RIPE runs one, and also the University of Oregon run one's called RootViews, which I believe was the original root collector. There are other ones as well. Radar.curator runs one as well, which you can sign in. Right now, it doesn't seem that Catchpoint or Thousand Eyes has a publicly viewable way to feed them roots, but I'm sure if you ask them, you can probably do it. And with that, thank you. And are there any questions?
So, any questions for Ben? Okay. Great. Well, please join me in thanking Ben for a very nice presentation. Thank you so much, Ben.